Here's a strange glass bottle floating in the middle of the void, and here's me, who somehow thought surviving inside it would be easy. Spoiler alert, I was completely wrong. Inside this bottle, I'm about to face unexpected dangers, discover hidden secrets, and survive a brutal, hardcore challenge where one mistake means instant death. My goal is to transform this tiny glass world suspended above the endless void into a fully functional base. But with so few resources to work with, trust me, this is going to be much harder than it looks. Day 1. I spawned inside the bottle, and honestly, things could have been much worse. Right away, I looked around and found a small tree, a pond of water, and some sugarcane. These are the only resources I'll have for the next 100 days, and something tells me this challenge won't be easy. As always, the first step is gathering wood, crafting a crafting table, and making my first tools. After picking up the sapling, I suddenly noticed another bottle floating off in the distance. Without thinking twice, I started digging down in search of stone, but somehow ended up somewhere I definitely wasn't supposed to be. Luckily, I reacted just in time and managed to save myself by landing in freezing cold water. It turned out this bottle contained a small lava pool and even some coal. By sunset, I cleared away all the grass, crafted a stone hoe, and tilled a small patch of farmland next to the water. I was down to just 1.5 hearts, so finding food immediately became my biggest priority. I built a cobblestone fence, placed a few torches for light, and spent the rest of the night chopping wood and planting more saplings. Day 2. Resources are incredibly limited here, so it's time to start creating them out of thin air. After thinking it through for quite a while, I realized I somehow needed to move the water source closer to the lava. I covered the top of the pond with dirt, dug a small tunnel from the side, and just a minute later, the water was finally close enough. Just like that, I officially had my own cobblestone generator, and honestly, it was one of the strangest ways I've ever built one. I spent the entire day mining blocks, although quite a few of them disappeared straight into the lava. By sunset, my first wheat had finally grown, but I was still a long way from baking bread. After upgrading all my tools to stone, I went right back to mining cobblestone. Day 3. I expanded my sugarcane farm a little. Space inside the bottle is limited, but there's still enough room to grow a few trees. I sealed the staircase with a trap door and kept waiting for my crops to grow. Curiosity got the better of me, so I started pillaring upward to see what was at the top. Unfortunately, there were no hidden treasures inside the bottle's cork, but from up there, I spotted several more bottles floating nearby. I'll definitely explore them later, but right now I have much bigger problems. The bottle already feels way too cramped, so it's finally time to expand beyond the glass walls and start building outside. I spent the rest of the night back at my cobblestone generator. Day 4. I managed to collect 5 stacks of cobblestone, and to save materials, I turned most of it into slabs. From the center of the bottle, I carefully started marking out a platform in every direction. It turned out the bottom of the bottle was made entirely of glass, and naturally I wanted to see how far down it went. Climbing underneath was incredibly dangerous, but after playing Skyblock, I had at least a little experience with this kind of thing. At the very bottom, I built a platform out of slabs that would eventually become the foundation for my mob farm. At sunrise, I harvested a little more wheat and finally baked my first loaf of bread. It wasn't much, but it was enough to restore some of my health. Day 5. I continued expanding the platform. You all know how much I love building giant circles in Minecraft, but today a simple square would do just fine. Little by little, everything came together, and by sunset, the platform was finally finished. During the night, I focused on gathering more dirt and expanding the farmland around my water source. Around midnight, the very first phantom appeared. That instantly became one of my biggest problems because I still didn't have a bed. It circled around my bottle the entire night, so I decided to trap it inside a boat and build a roof over it. Day 6. Well, I guess this survival world won't feel so lonely anymore. My choice of pets might be a little unusual, but trust me, they're about to have a very interesting future. While waiting for my crops to grow, I figured it was time to start building a tree farm. Around noon, I headed back to the cobblestone generator to gather materials for another important farm. I crafted another loaf of bread and enjoyed a quiet meal under the moonlight. Day 7, I checked on my new pets, although I still haven't decided what to name them. Then I chopped down more oak trees and climbed back down to continue building the mob farm. At this stage of the challenge, it's absolutely essential because it's the key to solving my biggest problem. After placing the support pillars for the spawning tower, I climbed to the top and started building the upper platform. Unfortunately, I completely ran out of cobblestone. That night, more phantoms came to visit my pets, and instead of pushing my luck, I headed underground to mine even more cobblestone. Day 8. I spent the entire day and the entire night doing the same repetitive work while trying to figure out how I was going to keep this survival challenge going. Day 9. I greatly expanded my tree farm and added even more dirt blocks around the bottle. After harvesting all my wheat, I finally restored my health back to full. Around midday, I worked on the mob farm, marking out the spawning chambers. By evening, I retreated back inside the bottle to hide from the growing swarm of phantoms that appeared every single night. Day 10. Out of nowhere, a heavy rainstorm rolled in, giving those flying rats an even bigger advantage. I carefully tried to fight my way outside, but it wasn't easy. I moved some of my supplies into a temporary storage area before returning to the mob farm to continue building the central drop shaft. I added the trapdoors where they were needed, sealed everything up, and started working on the floor. Just a minute later, my old friends came flying back, and I had to hide as fast as possible. Day 11. At sunrise, I chopped down more trees for trapdoors and expanded my little farm. By evening, exhausted, I headed back to the cobblestone generator where I spent the rest of the day mining. Day 12. It was finally time to build the walls of my mob farm. This design doesn't use water, so I'm hoping the mobs will simply wander into the right spot on their own. Normally, this farm is incredibly quick and easy to build, but there's one small problem inside this bottle. With my limited resources, everything takes forever. When I climbed back down to the lower platform, my first unwanted visitor was already waiting for me. I had to deal with it before getting back to work on the roof to avoid any more surprise guests. I immediately lit up part of the roof. Day 13. With a fresh supply of blocks, I kept building, and about 5 minutes later, the farm was finally complete. While waiting for mobs to spawn, I chopped more trees, then climbed down to check the results. To my surprise, not a single mob had fallen. I climbed much higher, convinced that would finally make the farm work. I peeked inside the spawning chamber, and it was completely empty. Something was definitely wrong. By sunrise, a few mobs had finally appeared on the roof, but I still couldn't figure out why the farm wasn't working properly. Day 14. I built a massive pillar and lowered my render distance. Then I tried covering the roof with slabs, even though I had a feeling that probably wasn't the real issue. The phantoms kindly volunteered to help with construction, so I was forced to retreat back into the bottle and spend the rest of the day tending my crops. Day 15. When I returned to the platform, nothing had changed. I broke a few blocks along the side and found only a handful of mobs inside, which was incredibly disappointing. I spent the rest of the day waiting above the bottle, but nothing in my life seemed to change. Day 16. It turned out the entire problem was just a bug with the map. After reloading the world, everything started working perfectly. Now I finally had a fully functional mob farm, a steady source of resources, and most importantly, experience. But I built all of this for one reason. As soon as I got my first string, I crafted wool and after 16 days, I finally had a proper bed, white, soft, and capable of getting rid of those annoying phantoms once and for all. I celebrated by harvesting my crops and grabbing a quick meal. At sunset, I paid another visit to the monsters, but they clearly weren't happy to see me. String was great, but now I also had a chance to get iron and even new food sources from zombies. That night, exhausted, I finally got to sleep, and I couldn't have been happier. Day 17. This day opened up a whole new set of possibilities and plenty of new challenges waiting ahead. I also realized I should probably build myself a house, considering I still didn't have one. I crafted a batch of stone swords and continued farming mobs, hoping to find potatoes or carrots. By evening, I'd collected a few golden armor pieces, some redstone, and way too many useless music discs from creepers. My farm was finally producing enough food to keep me alive, even if it was just barely. I spent every spare moment mining cobblestone, because that new platform definitely wasn't going to build itself. Day 18. I spent the entire day and night underground beside the glowing lava. If I wanted more blocks, there was simply no other option. Day 19. While I was underground, a full forest had grown above me, and now I could finally choose where to expand next. I filled the inside of the platform with slabs to save resources, but even then, they disappeared faster than I could place them. That evening, I crafted another batch of building materials and finished expanding the platform under the moonlight. In a great mood, I headed over to the mob farm, where an amazing surprise was waiting for me. I unlocked a new advancement, and with it came my very first iron ingot and a carrot. Right now, my biggest goal is collecting at least 3 iron ingots, so I can craft a bucket. After that, I'll figure out the next step. I expanded my storage area near the farm and used bone meal to speed up my crops. A good food supply would definitely come in handy because the next few days are going to be busy. Day 20. I had collected quite a bit of golden armor by now, so I figured it was finally time to put it to good use. Food and safety were no longer major concerns, which meant I could confidently move on. I chopped down every fully grown tree and immediately planted a fresh batch of saplings. Day 21. I gathered more dirt and expanded my farmland even further. Space is still extremely limited, but I'm hoping that once I finally get a bucket, I can redesign the farm into something much nicer. Around noon, I visited the mob farm and greeted a lonely witch. Then, completely out of nowhere, a zombie villager dropped into the chamber. I never expected a gift like that, but at that very moment, all my plans changed. I immediately trapped the rest of the mobs and carefully prepared to move this rare zombie somewhere safe. I placed a boat near the water elevator and successfully transported him. But just as I finished, a creeper had one final surprise waiting behind me. I reacted quickly enough to patch up the damage, but I realized then and there that creepers were going to remain a serious problem. Day 22. Survival was finally gaining momentum, and I decided it was time for my first real expedition. Armed with a stack of slabs, I headed toward the bottle with the cherry tree on the left. I was incredibly curious to see what was hidden inside. As I got closer, I built a staircase out of slabs to reach the bottle's height. The very first thing I noticed was iron ore, which could only mean one thing: this place was worth exploring. Inside, everything was peaceful, with pink flowers scattered everywhere. It almost felt wrong cutting down the cherry tree, but I really wanted to grow one back at my own base. As soon as I returned home, I threw the iron into the furnace and found myself one step closer to making my plans a reality. Day 23. Looking at my pets, I realized they desperately needed a new home. I picked a corner inside the bottle and started building a roof for them. Getting too close was risky, so my fishing rod came to the rescue. Once night fell, I successfully moved them into the bottle. It wasn't exactly a luxury home yet, but judging by the way they stared at me with their big green eyes, They seemed pretty happy just to still be alive. Day 24, I continued harvesting and replanting my crops. I tore down the old phantom shelter and cleared the area for future builds. At the same time, I kept checking my mob farm, hoping another zombie villager would eventually appear. The rest of the day was spent chopping oak trees, and that night, I added 2 more dirt blocks for my cherry saplings. After that, I dedicated the next 30 minutes to the cobblestone generator and built up a much healthier stockpile of blocks. Day 26. I headed out to chop down the cherry trees. Taking down trees like these is a real pain, but I don't exactly have many other options. Around noon, I took a quick lunch break before getting back to work. Looking around, that endless void surrounding me started to feel a little unsettling. I figured it was finally time to organize the inside of the bottle, so I moved my water source closer to the phantoms. Part of my farm had to go just to free up a bit of space inside this tiny glass prison. I reinforced the outer edge with cobblestone walls and finished the day harvesting my crops at day 27. I stopped by the mob farm to see if another zombie villager had spawned. Then I used some bone meal to boost my potato supply because, honestly, living on nothing but bread was getting old. At sunset, the mobs started causing a bit of trouble, but I managed to sort everything out in time. I still couldn't stop thinking about finding villagers, so that's going to be my main priority soon. A few minutes later, more phantoms arrived to join my pets, forcing me to stay safely inside the bottle for the rest of the night. Day 28. As soon as it felt safe, I went straight back to chopping oak trees. My chests may have been full, but I was still desperately short on actual building materials. Even this simple tree farm worked surprisingly well, although harvesting giant trees remained a challenge. Then I realized something. I'd had one incredibly important resource with me this entire time. I just wasn't using it properly. I filled my bucket with water, climbed onto the roof of the mob farm, and carefully poured water down each side. That should make mobs fall much more reliably. Honestly, I have no idea why I didn't do this sooner. Day 29. The morning kicked off with my first escaped creeper. Thankfully, the water elevator was right there to save me. It also made me realize that getting down safely was still a huge problem. I found a few damaged bows in storage, repaired them, and after killing the creeper, I even unlocked an advancement. But it felt like the real chaos was only beginning. I spent the entire day trying to place the water exactly where it needed to go, which wasn't easy with all those hostile neighbors waiting on the other side of the walls. As if that wasn't enough, an Enderman paid my island a visit around midnight. Luckily, we never made eye contact. Day 30. Seeing that many mobs pouring through the farm was actually pretty satisfying. Even better, I spotted another zombie villager almost immediately. That meant I had to carefully eliminate everything else while somehow keeping him alive. I climbed up a few blocks and sealed off the drop chute, but the creeper had other ideas. I reacted just in time and survived the explosion, only to find plenty more monsters waiting below. Unfortunately, I couldn't save the zombie villager this time. On the bright side, the witch survived, and she's a pretty valuable addition too. After grabbing a quick meal back home, I headed downstairs again, only to have a skeleton immediately try to knock me into the void. Yeah, I think that's enough excitement for one day. I could really use some peace and quiet. Day 31. I carefully stood on the bridge, staring down at a creeper and a zombie, with absolutely no idea how to deal with the situation. Instead, I headed toward the far bottle and built a bridge as far away as possible, hoping unloading the mob farm chunks would make everything despawn. For some reason, it didn't work. Since that plan failed completely, I went back to the old reliable solution: arrows. Once the path was clear, I quickly repaired the farm and finally got back to more important tasks. After crafting a fresh batch of stone pickaxes, I called it a day. The past few days had been exhausting, and a little rest was definitely overdue. Day 32. I added a few more slabs and finally sealed the entire spawning tube. Then I thinned out the mobs on the second floor so I could break a few unnecessary blocks and continue searching for another zombie villager. Alongside all that, I planted another round of crops and sorted through the growing pile of loot in storage. Around sunset, a witch wandered into my trap, another chance to add one to my collection. A minute later, though, a creeper had completely different plans. These green cucumbers are seriously starting to get on my nerves. I had no choice but to eliminate the witch and retreat back to safety. Day 33. After so much frustration, survival finally rewarded me with something amazing, my very first chicken. While I'd been busy elsewhere, the grass had spread enough for passive animals to start spawning. The next wave of mobs included another zombie villager, a witch, and of course, the mandatory creeper explosion. Once again, my life flashed before my eyes, and from that moment on, I really wasn't excited about visiting the mob farm anymore. Back at my storage area, I spotted another chicken behind me. A little romantic evening later, I had my very first chick and hope for a delicious, well, at least a stable future. I harvested more wheat and tried patching myself up with another loaf of bread. Then disaster struck. Two of my chickens somehow fell all the way down into the cobblestone generator. Thankfully, thanks to the water elevator, I managed to rescue them and bring them back to the surface. To make sure that never happened again, I quickly built them a proper pen beside the nearby tree. Hopefully, now I can finally sleep in peace. Day 34. I lit up the path leading to the mob farm and cleared out another wave of monsters. Carefully making my way to the back wall, I started covering it with slabs, while all kinds of strange noises echoed from below. Finally, it was time to relax and work on something a little more enjoyable. My crops were ready, so I harvested everything and even trampled the farmland to turn it back into regular dirt blocks. Later that evening, I gathered more materials and started preparing for yet another farm. After thinking about it for a while, I picked the area to the left of the bottle. The first step was expanding the platform with slabs to create enough room for construction. Day 35. I started laying out another circle in cobblestone because, let's be honest, you all know how much I love building circles in Minecraft. There was no way this survival series was going to be any different. I crafted pink cherry slabs and added them around the outer edge of the farm. Inside, I placed the first dirt blocks before making another trip to the neighboring bottle to gather even more. It felt a little painful tearing apart such a beautiful cherry grove, but right now it was my only source of dirt. I placed a water source in the center, tilled the farmland, then added small decorative pillars topped with cherry slabs. After dark, under the glow of torchlight, I expanded my potato farm. Thanks to the mob farm constantly supplying bone meal, I could grow crops much faster than before. A few more pink slabs later, and the farm was already starting to come together. Day 36. I definitely like this version of the farm much better. Building almost entirely from thin air is still incredibly difficult, but somehow that just makes this survival challenge even more enjoyable. Inspired by the new farm, I immediately expanded the platform on the opposite side to make room for my future house. I've gone way too long without a proper storage room or even a place to call home, so it's time to fix that. The rest of the night was spent gathering more wood. Day 37. My building projects keep getting bigger every day. Unfortunately, my supply of materials doesn't. Without wasting any time, I built a brand new cobblestone generator in a much more open area under the sky. Within minutes, fresh cobblestone was already flowing into my inventory. Everything was going perfectly until I looked away for 1 second. Suddenly, everything burst into flames, and I had to react immediately. I frantically jumped around trying to put out the fire. Let's just say I didn't escape without a few burns. Day 38. The danger had passed, and yesterday served as a pretty good reminder that lava and trees are a terrible combination. I spent the rest of the night mining cobblestone while thinking about the future of my floating island. Day 39. By now, I had collected 16 stacks of blocks, which should keep me going for a while. After crafting another batch of axes, I returned to harvesting cherry trees, climbing every single one to reach every last block. That evening, I fed my chickens and made sure to collect plenty of fresh saplings before calling it a day. Day 40. My morning didn't start with coffee, it started with harvesting crops. Thankfully, food is no longer something I have to worry about. I baked an entire stack of potatoes, and with a full stomach, it was time to get back to work. That night, I visited the mob farm once again and reduced the monster population, hoping another zombie villager would finally appear. Day 41. One of the creepers tried to give me a heart attack, but thankfully, everything turned out fine. Over the past few days, I'd gathered enough resources, so I figured it was finally time to start building my house. I began by laying out the foundation with stone bricks, carefully deciding on the size of the build. Once the base was finished, I immediately started raising the oak support pillars. By evening, part of the walls was already standing, and I reinforced the top with oak logs. Grabbing my stone axe, I stripped the wood to give the house a bit more character. Just before sunrise, I placed a few torches for lighting and took one last look at the layout from every angle. Day 42. The morning started with breakfast. On the left side, I began building a pink staircase leading up to the first floor of the house. I spent the first half of the day trying to make the staircase curve more naturally and take up less space, but it turned out the way it turned out. With that finished, I moved on to building the first floor walls. The floor would be made of cherry planks, and underneath the bedroom, I left a basement for storing resources, although that room would end up serving a very different purpose in the future. Back in the main room, I added cherry support beams between the oak pillars to reinforce the walls even more. On the right side, I started building the frame for a small balcony, and so far everything was coming together nicely. Day 43. I finished the walls of the main room and installed a wooden fence around the balcony. After smelting some cobblestone, I crafted stone slabs. The night was the perfect time to start working on the roof, even though I still hadn't decided exactly what shape it should have. Of course, the phantom showed up, but now that I had a bow and arrows, they weren't much of a problem anymore. I added stairs and slabs to give the roof more depth, and once I climbed back down, the first results were already visible. Inside, I lit everything up with torches and added a few slab shelves along the walls. Day 44. The moment I looked away, an arrow flew straight into my back. I immediately searched for the source, and one skeleton quickly met its end. After that, I walked around the house, adding a few more decorative details. I cleared away some of the cherry leaves, and by sunset, I finally moved my bed into my new home. At the same time, I couldn't neglect checking the mob farm in search of the zombie villager I needed, so I spent the entire night underneath the platform. A few minutes later, I spotted a zombie with unusual clothing in the crowd. I knew this was my chance. After eliminating every other mob, I carefully led him outside and trapped him in a boat right next to the first zombie villager. Day 45. I broke the blocks beneath the mobs and restored the farm to its original state, but then I realized I'd made a huge mistake. I'd completely forgotten about the open exit at the bottom of the farm. This was about to get interesting. I rushed to block the opening, but almost immediately, I heard the sound of a creeper exploding. The only silver lining was that, somehow, a witch survived the blast and ended up trapped below. I honestly have no idea how she was the only one left alive. Day 46. I crafted a new batch of chests and started organizing a proper storage room inside my house. It was nice to take a break from the chaos and focus on some routine work around the island. While sorting through my supplies, I found a small stash of redstone, and that instantly gave me an idea. I could finally craft a few repeaters, some redstone torches, and of course, a piston. I'd been working toward this moment for a long time, and now I finally had everything I needed to upgrade my cobblestone generator. I headed over immediately, broke the old crafting table, and replaced it with a piston. Behind it, I placed the repeaters and redstone dust to create an automatic cycle. The final step was simply adjusting the repeater delay until everything worked perfectly. A minute later, I noticed the cobblestone was getting pushed into my bottle, but luckily that was easy to fix by placing a furnace to stop the blocks. Now the generator was far more efficient, and my cobblestone would no longer burn up in the lava. Day 47. I crafted another batch of pickaxes and went back to mining cobblestone. I already had a small food farm and my own house, but there was still a long list of things left to build. I finally decided to spend my only 2 iron ingots on a pair of shears. Now I could collect leaves and use them to decorate my builds. By evening, I continued moving my resources into the new storage room. Day 48. I completely cleared away the trees and dirt blocks. I wanted a clean, flat platform for planning all my future builds. Of course, I couldn't ignore my crops either. They'd been waiting to be harvested for quite a while. On the opposite side of the food farm, I started marking out and expanding another platform for yet another important build. I also had the idea of making a lookout platform where I could admire all the changes happening across my island. From up there, everything was starting to come together. Considering how few resources I had, I'd made incredible progress, but the best part was still ahead. I also realized my current food farm would be far too small once I started breeding villagers, so that problem would need solving soon. Day 49. Near the cobblestone generator, I built a small dirt path and placed slabs above it to limit how tall the trees could grow. My platform was still tiny, but this compact little tree farm would become a reliable source of building materials. With a little bone meal, the saplings grew almost instantly, and it looked like construction could finally speed up. I also planted a few cherry trees near the house, although cutting them down was becoming harder and harder. Day 50. The adventures with trees continued. I also stopped by to check on my chickens, and thankfully, they wouldn't have to stay cramped inside that tiny pen for much longer. I spent the rest of the day and the entire night chopping wood. Day 51. Another heavy rainstorm rolled in. The weather in this world really wasn't doing me any favors. I started expanding the platform on the right side and prepared the area for building a barn. In the center, I laid down a foundation of full blocks and added a few support pillars. And of course, I stripped the logs, because that's just tradition at this point. At the front, I built the roof frame using cherry slabs, and everything was going according to plan. Once both sides were connected, all that was left was filling the roof with regular oak slabs. At night, I had to stay alert in case another skeleton decided to pay me a visit. By midnight, the roof was finished, so I lit up the interior and added a few more support beams. The animal pen would be built from cobblestone, though honestly, I didn't exactly have many materials to choose from. At sunrise, I crafted a few composters, hay bales, and started decorating the new barn. Day 52. In a few places, I replaced sections of the fence with barrels and added some yellow wool blocks inside. After grabbing a good meal, I got right back to work. I added a bit of dirt to the interior, even if it wasn't the most resource-efficient choice, and installed a cherry fence beneath the roof. Around noon, I finally moved my chickens into their new home. I fed them right away and removed the old enclosure beside the bottle. I scattered a few leaf blocks around for decoration, and just like that, the animal pen was completely finished. That evening, I harvested all my wheat. I had plenty of hungry mouths to feed already, and soon enough, there would be villagers too. Day 53. Stepping out onto my balcony, I looked over at the farm and quickly realized it wasn't going to keep up with the amount of food I'd soon need. I grabbed a stack of slabs and immediately started expanding the platform. From this point on, the farm would grow upward with multiple levels of crops, although I still had to figure out the overall design. I carefully walked along the edge of the void, placing block after block. Falling was always a possibility, but my will to survive was definitely stronger. Day 54. I headed toward the newly discovered area to gather more dirt. There wasn't much of it, but it would be enough for my farm. I moved all the dirt to the second and third floors and immediately dug out water holes in the center of each level. By sunset, the farm had changed dramatically. With only a little work left to do, I poured water into the channels, tilled all the soil, and built fences along the slab edges so I wouldn't accidentally fall into the void. Finally, I added some cherry wood accents, creating a pattern that looked surprisingly good. Day 55. I ended up running out of dirt, so part of the second floor had to be filled with cobblestone instead. I added an oak tree on the left side and stripped the logs. It actually turned out looking pretty good. As the sun set, I planted all the new crops, and at this point, I could confidently say that my food problems were officially over. Over the last couple of days, my island had changed a lot. Unfortunately, one thing hadn't changed at all. I was still constantly running out of wood. After harvesting yet another batch of logs, I headed straight back to the cobblestone generator. Day 56. I spent the first half of the day mining cobblestone, and around noon I was greeted by a little green surprise sitting on top of my house. I climbed up right away and politely asked the creeper to leave. Once that problem was dealt with, I could finally get back to mining in peace. Day 57. I decided it was time to completely tear down my tree farm and move it somewhere else. The platform had become way too cramped, and I was constantly tripping over leaves and dropped sticks. While mining cobblestone, I couldn't help but wonder how my generator had managed to stay looking like such a mess for so long. It clearly deserved some attention. I placed the first support pillar and threw a batch of cobblestone into the furnaces to smelt into stone bricks. After stopping by to feed my feathered friends, I wrapped the generator with stone bricks and started building a proper floor. The walls, just like my house, would be made from cherry planks. Day 58. Everything was going smoothly until I noticed something was seriously wrong. There were only a few blocks of space between the bottle and my stone farm, and that definitely wasn't enough. As painful as it was, I had no choice but to tear everything down, including the generator itself. The foundation blocks disappeared into my inventory, followed by the repeaters and redstone dust. Later that evening, I expanded the platform and rebuilt the entire mechanism 10 blocks farther away from the bottle. A few minutes later, everything was back in place, this time exactly where it belonged. Day 59. Once again, I had to fine-tune the piston timing, and the mechanism still felt a little odd. I gathered all the materials I needed from storage and started building the second version of the generator's exterior. The result was a compact little building, but give me a bit more time and I guarantee you won't recognize this place anymore. I split the upper section into 2 parts and started framing the roof with polished deep slate pillars. Around the outside, I added a few more oak supports, then used a water bucket to climb onto the roof. The trim would be made of stone bricks, while the inside would stay true to the cherry wood theme. The only problem was that my supply of pink planks was running dangerously low, so chopping more trees suddenly became a top priority. Day 60. Lumberjack mode activated. By noon, I was back working on the roof. The right side would have a small flat section with space for an attic. Night was approaching, so I hurried to reinforce the walls with fences, added leaves around the building, and installed the entrance doors. Along the top of the walls, I started placing stairs in different orientations, and I ended up really liking how that detail turned out. Day 61. I honestly can't tell if this looks more like Barbie's dream house or Ken's vacation cabin, but one thing's for sure, the generator was finally completely hidden, and I no longer had to stare at that ugly redstone contraption. That deserved celebrating with a nice baked potato before moving on. I was getting closer and closer to curing my villagers, which meant I was going to need a massive food supply. Fighting alongside a witch while she's wearing iron armor isn't exactly safe. It takes plenty of preparation. I removed the tree growth limiter, cleaned up all the leftover clutter around my island, and used my remaining slabs to expand every corner of the platform. The island's shape still looked awkward, so I decided it was time to smooth out the sharp corners and give it a much more natural outline. Day 62. Most of the survival challenge was already behind me, and these were the results so far. I had a proper house, a food farm, animals, and even a dedicated stone farm. Overall, not bad, but everything still looked cold and lifeless. Near the animal barn, I marked out another area and started filling it with slabs. Maybe another building would appear here soon, or maybe I'd fall into the void before reaching day 100. Time would tell. On the opposite side, I looked over at my future villagers, sitting patiently in their boats while mentally preparing myself for the curing process. Somehow, for what felt like the 100th time, I completely ran out of stone again. I think it's pretty obvious what I'd be doing for the rest of the day and the night. Day 63. I took another look around the island, and for the first time it was actually starting to feel like a real place. All that gray stone was getting depressing, so I planted a few oak saplings near the house, then picked a nice spot for several cherry trees as well. That night, a nasty surprise was waiting for me in what would become the future garden. I still have no idea how I noticed it in time. Once the danger was gone, I sped up the trees with bone meal and chopped down the giant oaks. Day 64. After just one more day, I finally started to like the look of my island. I wouldn't call it love at first sight, but it definitely had potential. I fed my chickens some wheat seeds and continued inspecting everything I'd built. According to the schedule, it was time to harvest and replant the crops, so work had to continue. I moved the water source into the basement, and while working beneath the bottle, I ran into a whole swarm of bats. Using nothing but water and lava, I began building a nether portal. As you probably guessed, I didn't exactly have a diamond pickaxe. Little by little, I carried lava up from underground, hoping I'd have just enough to finish the frame. Day 65. The obsidian frame was finally complete. I have to admit, this was my first time building a portal this way, and only because I had no other choice. The only thing I was missing was flint and steel, so I'd have to light the portal using white wool made from string and a few wooden planks instead. The first attempt failed, and the blocks simply burned away, but on the second try, the portal finally lit. That opened up a whole new chapter with nether exploration and piglin bartering. I removed the temporary wooden roof protecting the portal and started preparing for my next adventure. Day 66. I found a few spare armor pieces in storage that had dropped from zombies at my mob farm. After gearing up properly, I stepped through the portal and spawned on a hill overlooking a lava lake. Moving as carefully as possible, I started mining nether gold ore. Apples weren't my problem, I had plenty of those, but gold was almost impossible to obtain in my world. That's exactly why I needed access to the nether. I built a small bridge between the hills and kept exploring. My goal was simple: collect as much gold as possible without running into any piglins. By the end of the night, I'd gathered 5 full stacks of gold nuggets. That was more than enough reason to head back home. Day 67. I finally crafted 2 golden apples, and now everything else was ready. My chicken army kept growing at an alarming rate, although for now they still had enough space. The rest of the day was spent doing routine chores and baking potatoes in the furnaces. That night, after what felt like forever, I finally got to sleep. Day 68. I built a protective wall beside the witch to keep myself safe. Then, I carefully moved in closer, hoping she'd throw the potion I needed. Somehow, she didn't keep me waiting long. On my second attempt, I successfully gave both zombie villagers their golden apples and began the curing process. Honestly, I think the secret to getting the right splash potion is simply standing as close to the witch as possible. The closer you are, the better the odds. The witch had done her job, so she officially earned a vacation to the Maldives. While waiting, I expanded the platform a little more. A few minutes later, the two newly cured villagers stared at me in complete confusion, clearly wondering where they had ended up. I quickly boxed them in, and now I somehow had to get them up to the main platform. Day 69. I gave both villagers the farmer profession and tried guiding them up the staircase. The first one figured it out almost immediately, but the second one, not so much. At one point, I was seriously considering threatening him with lava. Thankfully, after placing a composter a little higher up, he finally decided to cooperate and climbed up to inspect his new home. For now, maybe permanently, I placed a few beds in the basement and sent both villagers off to sleep. Day 70. I harvested a huge amount of potatoes to feed my new villagers. These guys have an unbelievable appetite, but I have to admit, they're one of the most important parts of this survival world. I added even more composters and beds, then handed over every bit of food I'd managed to collect. Inside the barn, another batch of eggs hatched into even more chicks, and I was already starting to think about reducing the size of my chicken army. By evening, I was greeted with an incredible surprise. The very first baby villager was born. I'd say that counts as a major victory. Day 71. I headed into the fiery dimension to trade with piglins. To make my plan work, I needed Fletchers, and for that I had to get my hands on some flint. One generous piglin traded me 10 blocks of gravel, and for that I owe him a big thank you. I quickly broke the gravel, got the flint I needed, and crafted 4 fletching tables. After selling my first batch of sticks, I already had 6 emeralds in my inventory, but of course, this was only the beginning. Day 72. It was time to head underneath the island and bring my mob farm back to life by clearing out the extra mobs. I'd honestly call this place the farm of pain and suffering because no other survival world has ever given me this many problems. By midnight, the platform was finally finished, and for once, I could sleep in peace. Day 73. The morning started with the unexpected appearance of an iron golem, although it disappeared just as quickly as it showed up, leaving behind 5 iron ingots. After 20 hours of gameplay, I could finally move on to iron tools and armor. Before I even had time to react, a second golem appeared, so I had to deal with it immediately. This was all great news, but it made one thing obvious. I needed a proper iron farm. I needed hoppers for my stone generator, better armor, and plenty of iron for trading with armorers. I quickly prepared a platform near the mob farm, placed a boat in the right spot, and carefully lured a zombie out of the farm. At least now, the little guy finally had a purpose in life. Day 74. Iron golems kept invading my room, but not for much longer. I moved several beds downstairs and continued building the brand new farm. An iron farm is basically a survival essential, and living without one, especially under these conditions, is incredibly inconvenient. I also stopped by to visit my winged pets in their boat. Soon enough, I'll have to build them a proper home too. Once night fell, I took the opportunity to move the villagers into the iron farm using beds. Day 75. Once again, I ran completely out of cobblestone, although I have to admit working from such a cozy house makes the grind much more enjoyable. The day got so hot that one of the iron golems somehow caught fire on my balcony, and trust me, I had absolutely nothing to do with it. That night, I finished the wall framework, poured a bucket of lava onto the signs, and placed several water sources across the platform. Day 76. I broke the temporary blocks inside the villager's chamber, and the farm immediately started working. It felt amazing to see everything function perfectly on the first try, for once. Later that evening, I visited the rest of the villagers while they were peacefully sleeping, repaired part of their floor, and started placing buttons on the solid blocks. Day 77. I opened the chest and found my first 28 iron ingots. I couldn't have been happier. I watched the farm for a little longer, just to make sure everything was running smoothly without any issues. Then I crafted my very first full set of iron armor, along with iron tools. Honestly, it had been a very long time since I'd had gear like this. I spent the rest of the night walking around my island in the rain, admiring everything I'd built. Day 78. I noticed that some of my chickens had somehow escaped. Down in the villagers' basement, they also seemed to be holding some kind of secret meeting. Whatever they were planning, it looked suspicious. I gathered a few oak saplings from storage and decided it was finally time to build a proper tree farm. After climbing down into the void, I built a path and started marking out the area. Construction didn't last long though, because by evening, I had to return to my old friend, the cobblestone generator, to restock on blocks. Day 79. A skeleton picked a fight with me and lost, just like every other mob that got in my way. While I still had time, I decided to relocate the tree farm and rebuild it somewhere else under the open sky. By evening, I had finished laying out the new platform and started filling it in with slabs. The platform turned out much bigger than expected, so it kept me busy for the rest of the day and well into the night. Day 80, once again, I'm stealing cobblestone from my generator. Day 81, nothing unusual here, just reducing the chicken population a little. They'd completely taken over the barn and were eating an unreasonable amount of wheat seeds. Down below, I also tried teaching one of the iron golems how to fly. Let's just say he wasn't a very talented student. On the finished platform, I started laying out rows of dirt so I could plant all my trees in neat straight lines without worrying about spacing. The mobs were still spawning like crazy, but sadly an enchanting table was still out of reach. Sure, I could wait for cows to spawn, but that would probably take forever. I spent the rest of the day organizing my storage, then returned to building oak tree growth limiters that evening. After planting a few more green saplings, my old phantom friends showed up again, but this time, the iron golem picked the right side and reminded them who was really in charge. Day 82. As it turns out, the area underneath my island is paradise for phantoms since the sunlight can't burn them there. Instead of waiting forever for the forest to grow naturally, I grabbed some bone meal and sped the whole process up. The end of this survival challenge was getting closer, but I still had plenty of ideas left to bring to life. By nighttime, I'd already collected 5 stacks of oak logs, and I knew this was only the beginning. From this angle, my island looked a little intimidating, but planting trees under the moon and stars was surprisingly relaxing. Day 83. For the first time in a while, I actually had a free moment to watch the sunrise over this empty world. I grabbed some charcoal from storage and crafted my first campfires. Then I visited the mob farm and realized it was finally time to automate it. I connected hoppers to the collection chest and placed campfires on top of them. Now the mobs had their own personal sauna, while I had an endless supply of bones and string. Then another idea hit me, so I sprinted back to storage and gathered everything I needed. I headed over to the cobblestone generator, quickly dismantled the entire mechanism, built a small pool, and filled it with water. Day 84. I sealed the top with cobblestone, added trapdoors to the front, and connected hoppers to a chest. Right in the center, I placed a lava source and climbed down to test the brand new farm. Things didn't go exactly according to plan, but it still produced stone, which was all that mattered. For now, I could only mine cobblestone, but once I traded with the villagers for a silk touch pickaxe, a whole new set of possibilities would open up. By the end of the night, I already had 14 stacks of blocks in storage. This new design was dramatically more efficient. Day 85. I returned to the nether to collect more lava as fuel. Back home, I emptied every bucket into my furnaces and loaded them with cobblestone to start producing smooth stone. The next build on my list would require a ridiculous amount of stone and stone bricks. This is what my island looked like now. It was definitely cramped, but for the first time, it actually felt alive. That evening, I traded sticks with my villagers for emeralds, then spent the rest of the night mining even more cobblestone. Day 86. I turned a few of my villagers into toolsmiths and started leveling them up through trading. At level 2, they began buying iron ingots, so the trades went by incredibly fast. The first villager offered me a diamond axe with efficiency, which was already a fantastic start. The second one sold me an efficiency pickaxe, meaning mining cobblestone was about to become much faster. Day 87. I crafted my very first anvil and placed it on the crafting table by the window in my room. I combined 2 axes to get one with both efficiency and unbreaking, then upgraded my pickaxe to efficiency 4. Armed with my new shovel, I headed to a lonely bottle filled with tall grass and started clearing every last block. I needed absolutely everything I could get. Beneath one of my platforms, I built another small area and started growing cherry trees. That's pretty much how the rest of my night went. Day 88. I collected all the stone from my furnaces and made another trip to the Nether to refill my lava supplies. Just look at this bottle. This is literally where my entire survival journey began. Its appearance had barely changed, and I figured that made it the perfect centerpiece for one more interesting build. I started by placing several columns around each wider section and laying the foundation for a tower. Instead of using ladders, I relied on water. Honestly, I think ladders are a thing of the past anyway. With the 4 main pillars finished, I connected them together. Day 89. Building in daylight is so much nicer, so I really needed to pick up the pace. I removed the original fence supports beneath the bottle and added more stone pillars around the sharp corners. Then I connected everything through the center, creating an interesting pattern for the next stage of construction. The idea was to turn this into a watchtower, although I still had no clue how well it would fit the overall look of my island. Day 90. I decorated the top with cherry logs and a few slabs. Every move needed to be carefully planned, but if I'm being honest, I was completely improvising at this point. The bottle now sat inside the new structure, so I could finally build the floor around it. It looked pretty strange for now, but there was still a long way to go before the final result. I moved the water source beneath my balcony and added a pink fence around the tower's 2nd floor. Day 91. Looking at the tower in daylight, the bottle was already almost unrecognizable, but I definitely wasn't done yet. I added a few pink stairs around the base and finished the first outer layer of the roof. Then I released my phantom pets into the open sky. From now on, this tower would be their personal bottle. Day 92. The morning greeted me with the first skeleton standing on top of my watchtower. It was supposed to protect me, not try to get me killed. While standing at the edge of the void, I suddenly noticed several more bottles far off on the horizon. Without wasting any time, I set off to explore. Looking back, I could see just how much my island had changed, but it was time to move forward. One of the bottles turned out to be an entire frog island, complete with a witch hut. The moment I heard the witch growling inside, I realized it wasn't the right time to go in and quickly headed back home. Day 93. Next on my list was a bottle filled with sand, and sand was exactly what I needed right now. I gathered every bit of it, already knowing the perfect use for it. I dedicated one section of my island beneath the cherry tree to a small desert biome, filling the area with slabs around the edges. Day 94. I sprinted across another dangerously narrow bridge and started collecting every single dirt block from the next bottle. Back home, I used it to create a grassy meadow near my house, while connecting part of it back to the bottle so grass could eventually spread across every block. Instead of waiting around, I jumped into the nether and started mining plenty of netherrack. Day 95. Those blocks would become another decorative biome that should fit perfectly into the island's overall design. By this point, the grass had only spread a few blocks, but luckily I still had time. Using a single iron ingot and some planks, I crafted a shield and marched straight into the witch hut. Just a few swings later, the territory was mine, and the frogs had officially been rescued. Day 96. I crafted a small batch of lanterns and placed lighting posts around different parts of the island. I surrounded the future meadow with slabs while still waiting for the grass to spread. That night, I visited visited the mob farm and expanded the storage system. The farm had become so efficient that the chests filled up in no time. Looking over the island from above, it looked absolutely incredible under the night sky. Day 97. I expanded the platforms beside my food farm before heading into the oak forest to chop down more trees. By sunset, everything had been collected, and before leaving, I made sure to replant every single sapling. Day 98. I started placing slabs all around the outer edge of the island to build a protective fence and make this survival world a little safer. In the end, I managed to fence off the entire island, and surprisingly, I had just enough wood to finish it. Day 99. The grass had finally spread across the entire meadow, so I grabbed some bone meal to grow flowers. Early that morning, I let the villagers outside for the very first time so they could finally see the sunlight. They settled in almost immediately and began wandering around the island. Near my house, I built a small marketplace where I could trade with my villagers. That night, I kicked one particularly rude villager out of my bedroom and finally got some well-deserved rest. Day 100. I filled my inventory with slabs and set off into the endless void in search of new lands. Before long, I discovered a massive bottle containing an entire ocean, and I couldn't wait to explore it. Inside, I found a complete underwater world with coral reefs, turtles, and even a small island. After surviving here for 100 days, I was only just discovering this place. It made me wonder how many more secrets were still waiting to be found. By sunset, I made it back home just in time to make sure all my villagers had gone to sleep. Their sleeping arrangements weren't exactly luxurious, but at least they were safe. And with that, my survival journey comes to an end. Thank you all so much for sticking with me until the very end. This challenge was honestly much harder than I ever expected. When I started this world, I never imagined I'd be building an entire island with little more than wood and cobblestone. But somehow, even with such limited resources, I managed to completely transform the tiny bottle where it all began. If you'd like to try this map yourself, you can download on my Patreon. Every useful link will be in the description. Thanks for watching. I've been Simon, and I'll see you all again very soon.